This might be the hardest story I've ever had to tell, and I'm honestly scared about how people will judge me. Most of you probably think any father trying to keep a child away from her mother must be either controlling or vindictive. But I promise you that by the time I finish explaining what I discovered, you'll understand that I was faced with an impossible choice between following the law and saving my daughter's life. I took actions that some people consider extreme, and I broke rules that society says should never be broken. But when you hear what was happening to my 11-year-old daughter, while everyone expected me to just follow proper legal procedures, you might realize that sometimes being a good parent means being willing to be called the bad guy. My name is Marcus. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a senior accountant for a mid-sized firm in Phoenix, Arizona. 2 years ago, I went through what I thought was a relatively amicable divorce from my ex-wife, Jennifer. After 8 years of marriage that had gradually grown cold and incompatible, we had tried counseling, attempted to rekindle our relationship, but ultimately realized that we had grown into completely different people who wanted different things from life. The divorce itself was handled professionally and without major drama. We agreed on a fair division of assets. Jennifer kept the house, and she had been the primary caregiver for our daughter Isabella. I moved into a nice apartment about 15 minutes away. Most importantly, we established a shared custody arrangement that seemed to work well for everyone involved, especially Isabella, who was 9 years old at the time and was already struggling with the emotional impact of our separation. Isabella is the absolute center of my universe, and she always has been since the moment she was born 11 years ago. She's incredibly intelligent, creative, and sensitive, with a natural talent for art and music that amazes me constantly. Before the divorce, she was a happy, confident child who excelled in school, had plenty of friends, and seemed to be thriving in every aspect of her life. Jennifer and I might not have been compatible as a married couple, but we had always been united in our commitment to giving Isabella the best possible childhood and supporting her development. Our initial custody arrangement seemed to work beautifully. For the first 6 months after the divorce, Isabella would spend weekdays with Jennifer and weekends with me, plus alternating holidays and school vacations. She seemed to be adjusting well to having two homes, and both Jennifer and I were making genuine efforts to maintain consistency in rules, bedtimes, and expectations, so that Isabella felt secure and stable despite the major change in our family. Structured Jennifer had always been a devoted mother during our marriage, perhaps even more involved in Isabella's daily care than I was due to my demanding work schedule. She had been the one who handled most of the school communications, arranged playdates, attended parent-teacher conferences, and managed Isabella's medical appointments and extracurricular activities. I had trusted her completely with Isabella's well-being and had no reason to question her parenting abilities or dedication to our daughter's happiness and safety. The first signs that something was wrong began appearing about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. Isabella started returning from her time with Jennifer, displaying behaviors that were completely out of character for her. She became withdrawn and anxious, started having frequent nightmares that would wake her up screaming, and began struggling academically for the first time in her life. Initially, I attributed these changes to the normal adjustment period that children experience after their parents' divorce. I had read extensively about how to help children cope with family changes, and everything I had learned suggested that some behavioral regression and emotional difficulties were completely normal and expected during this transition period. But as weeks turned into months, Isabella's concerning behaviors became more frequent and more severe. She started flinching when adults approached her too quickly, became extremely anxious about being left alone even for short periods, developed what appeared to be obsessive behaviors around food, hoarding snacks in her backpack and eating frantically when meals were presented to her. Most disturbing of all, Isabella began showing physical signs that made me question what was happening during her time with Jennifer. She would return from her mother's house wearing dirty clothes that smelled like cigarette smoke, with tangled hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, sometimes with minor injuries like bruises or scrapes that she couldn't or wouldn't explain clearly. When I asked Isabella about these changes, she would become evasive and anxious, giving vague explanations that didn't make sense or simply saying that she didn't remember how something had happened. She seemed increasingly reluctant to return to her mother's house after our weekends together, sometimes crying or begging me to let her stay with me permanently. I tried discussing my concerns with Jennifer, but she became defensive and dismissive, insisting that Isabella was just being dramatic and manipulative, trying to play her parents against each other to get attention. Jennifer claimed that Isabella was perfectly fine during their time together, and suggested that I was being overprotective and looking for problems that didn't actually exist. The conversation with Jennifer left me feeling confused and second-guessing my own observations. Maybe I was being overprotective. Or maybe I was unconsciously projecting my own adjustment difficulties onto Isabella's behavior. But deep in my gut, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. As Isabella's concerning behaviors continued to escalate, I decided that I needed to understand what was really happening during her time with Jennifer. I started paying closer attention to details that I had previously overlooked, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Isabella began mentioning people I had never heard of before, adults who were apparently spending significant time at Jennifer's house. When I asked casual questions about these individuals, Isabella's descriptions were vague and inconsistent, suggesting that she either didn't know much about them or had been instructed not to discuss them with me. More alarmingly, Isabella started making casual references to being left alone at the house for extended periods while Jennifer was out with friends or running errands. When I pressed for details, Isabella would quickly change the subject or claim she had misspoken. But the pattern of these references suggested that she was being left unsupervised much more frequently than would be appropriate for a 9-year-old child. I also noticed that Isabella's general knowledge about current events, school activities, and things happening in her neighborhood had become strangely limited during the time periods when she was with Jennifer. She seemed disconnected from normal childhood routines and social interactions, as if she was spending most of her time isolated from the outside world. The physical signs of neglect became more obvious and more frequent. Isabella would arrive at my apartment, hungry and dehydrated, despite supposedly having just eaten dinner at her mother's house. Her clothes were often inappropriate for the weather, suggesting that no adult had checked the forecast or helped her prepare for outdoor activities. Most concerning of all, she frequently seemed exhausted and disoriented, as if she hadn't been sleeping properly or maintaining a normal daily schedule. When I tried to address these concerns with Jennifer again, her response was dramatically different from our previous conversations. Instead of being defensive about her parenting, she became hostile and accusatory, claiming that I was trying to manipulate the custody situation because I was jealous of her new social life and romantic relationships. For the first time, explicitly mentioned that she had been dating someone new, a man named Derek, who she described as understanding and supportive of her transition back to single life. She insisted that Derek was wonderful with Isabella and that having a positive male role model in the house was beneficial for our daughter's development. But when I asked Isabella about Derek, her reaction was immediate and visceral fear. She begged me not to make her talk about him, became physically agitated, and started crying uncontrollably. Her reaction was so extreme that I knew immediately that this man represented some kind of serious threat to my daughter's safety and well-being. Isabella's terrified reaction to any mention of Derek convinced me that I needed to take immediate action to understand what was happening in Jennifer's household. I made the difficult decision to hire a private investigator, not because I wanted to spy on my ex-wife, but because I was genuinely afraid for my daughter's safety and needed concrete evidence of what was occurring during Isabella's time away from me. The private investigator's initial report was far worse than anything I had imagined possible. Jennifer had indeed been leaving Isabella alone for extended periods, sometimes overnight, while she went out drinking with Derek and his friends. The house had become a gathering place for a group of adults who regularly used illegal drugs, drank heavily, and engaged in loud, disruptive behavior that continued late into the night while Isabella was trying to sleep. Derek himself had a criminal background that included arrests for domestic violence, drug possession, and assault. He had been convicted of hitting a previous girlfriend badly enough to send her to the hospital, and had served time in county jail for drug-related offenses.
Ow.
This was the man that Jennifer had welcomed into her home and allowed around our vulnerable daughter. The investigators' surveillance revealed that Jennifer's own behavior had deteriorated dramatically since our divorce. She was drinking alcohol daily, often to the point of obvious intoxication, and using marijuana and other recreational drugs regularly. Her judgment was severely impaired, her decision-making was erratic, and she seemed completely unaware of how her lifestyle changes were affecting Isabella's safety and well-being. Most disturbing of all, the investigation uncovered evidence that Jennifer was essentially using Isabella as a prop to maintain the appearance of respectability when it served her purposes. When Derek's friends came over to party, Isabella would be sent to her room and told to stay there no matter what she heard. When Jennifer needed to appear responsible to social services or school officials, she would temporarily clean up her act and present herself as a devoted single mother. The private investigator also discovered that Jennifer had been lying to me about Isabella's daily routines and activities. Instead of attending after-school programs and playdates as Jennifer had claimed, Isabella was spending most of her time alone in her room while adults partied in the living areas of the house. She wasn't receiving help with homework, wasn't maintaining regular meal schedules, and wasn't getting the social interaction and developmental support that a child her age desperately needs. Financial records obtained by the investigator showed that Jennifer was spending her child support payments on alcohol, drugs, and entertainment for Derek and his friends, rather than on Isabella's clothing, school supplies, or other necessities. She had stopped paying for Isabella's music lessons and art classes, activities that had been central to our daughter's happiness and self-expression. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jennifer had become an unfit parent who was putting our daughter at serious risk of physical harm, emotional trauma, and developmental damage. Armed with the private investigator's disturbing findings, I knew I had to find a way to get Isabella to open up to me about what was really happening during her time with Jennifer. I approached this conversation with extreme care, knowing that Isabella had probably been instructed not to discuss certain topics with me, and that she might be afraid of getting her mother in trouble. What Isabella finally told me was heartbreaking and infuriating beyond anything I could have imagined. She described a home environment that was chaotic, frightening, and completely inappropriate for a child. Derek and his friends would arrive at the house in the early evening and party until the early morning hours, playing loud music, drinking heavily, and sometimes getting into physical altercations that terrified Isabella. During these parties, Isabella was expected to stay in her bedroom no matter what was happening in the rest of the house. She had witnessed Derek grabbing and shaking Jennifer during arguments, had seen adults passed out on the furniture, and had been awakened multiple times by the sounds of breaking glass and shouting. She lived in constant fear and anxiety, never knowing what kind of chaos she would encounter when she came home from school. The neglect Isabella described was systematic and severe. Jennifer would often forget to prepare meals, leaving Isabella to fend for herself by eating whatever snacks or leftover food she could find in the kitchen. Sometimes there would be no food in the house at all for days, and Isabella would go to school hungry and remain hungry until she could eat at my apartment. On the weekends, Isabella's sleep schedule had been completely disrupted by the noise and chaos of the adult parties. She would lie awake in her room, terrified and exhausted, listening to arguing and sometimes violence happening just outside her bedroom door. She had developed chronic insomnia and was frequently too tired to concentrate during school, which explained her declining academic performance. Most devastating of all, Isabella revealed that Derek had been verbally and emotionally abusive toward her, calling her names, threatening her, and making it clear that she was an unwelcome burden. In what he considered to be his relationship with Jennifer, he had told Isabella multiple times that Jennifer would be happier without her, and had suggested that she should go live with me permanently so that he and Jennifer could have privacy. Isabella also confided that Jennifer had begun drinking so heavily that she would sometimes pass out in the middle of the day, leaving Isabella to care for herself and even to care for Jennifer when she became sick from alcohol consumption. Isabella had been forced to take on adult responsibilities that were completely inappropriate for a child her age, including trying to wake Jennifer up for work and cleaning up messes left by the partying adults. The emotional impact of this environment on Isabella was profound and heartbreaking. She had developed severe anxiety, depression, and trauma responses that were affecting every aspect of her life. She felt responsible for her mother's problems, guilty for wanting to escape the situation, and terrified that speaking up would only make things worse. With overwhelming evidence of child neglect and emotional abuse, I immediately contacted my divorce attorney to begin the process of seeking emergency custody modification. I was confident that any reasonable judge would see the danger Isabella was facing and would immediately remove her from Jennifer's custody until she could demonstrate that she had addressed her substance abuse and lifestyle issues. My confidence was completely misplaced. The family court system proved to be far more complicated, biased, and frustrating than I had ever imagined possible. Despite presenting clear evidence of neglect, substance abuse, and exposure to domestic violence, the initial response from the court was skeptical and dismissive of my concerns. Jennifer's response to my custody petition was swift and vicious. Instead of acknowledging the problems in her household or expressing any concern for Isabella's well-being, she immediately launched a counterattack, designed to discredit me and paint me as a vindictive ex-husband who was using our daughter as a weapon in our divorce. Jennifer claimed that I was suffering from an inability to accept our divorce and was engaging in parental alienation, deliberately coaching Isabella to make false accusations against her mother. She presented me as a controlling, obsessive man who couldn't tolerate the fact that she had moved on with her life and found happiness with a new partner. Most infuriatingly, Jennifer portrayed Derek as a positive influence who had helped her transition back to independence and single parenthood. She described him as patient and understanding with Isabella, claiming that any conflict between them was simply the normal adjustment period that occurs when children have to accept new adults in their parents' life. The court-appointed guardian, ad litem, who was assigned to represent Isabella's interests, seemed predetermined to favor keeping the child with her mother. This guardian made statements about the importance of the mother-child bond and expressed skepticism about fathers who sought primary custody, suggesting that such requests were usually motivated by financial considerations rather than genuine concern for the child's welfare. Even more frustrating, the judge assigned to our case seemed to share these biases. During our initial hearing, he made several comments indicating that he believed children belonged with their mothers unless there was evidence of severe physical abuse, that fathers who fought for custody were often motivated by a desire to avoid paying child support rather than by legitimate parenting concerns. The legal system seemed designed to protect Jennifer's parental rights rather than to protect Isabella's safety and well-being. Every piece of evidence I presented was scrutinized and questioned. While Jennifer's denials and explanations were accepted at face value despite their obvious inconsistencies with the documented facts, the bias I encountered in the family court system was both shocking and infuriating. Despite presenting extensive documentation of neglect, substance abuse, and exposure to domestic violence, the court seemed more concerned with preserving Jennifer's parental rights than with protecting Isabella's safety and well-being. The judge repeatedly emphasized the importance of maintaining the mother-child relationship, suggesting that removing a child from her mother's custody should only be considered in cases of severe physical abuse. He seemed to view emotional neglect, exposure to drug use, and the presence of violent criminals in the household as unfortunate but not necessarily grounds for custody modification. Even more frustrating, the court seemed to accept Jennifer's explanations and promises at face value, despite the overwhelming evidence of her unfitness as a parent. When presented with evidence of Derek's criminal background, Jennifer claimed that people could change and that Derek's past shouldn't be held against him. When confronted with evidence of her substance abuse, she promised to attend counseling and claimed that her drinking was just a temporary response to the stress of the divorce. The guardian ad litem assigned to represent Isabella's interests proved to be completely inadequate and potentially harmful to my daughter's well-being. This guardian spent minimal time with Isabella, conducted only superficial interviews, and seemed to have made up her mind about the case before reviewing any of the evidence I had presented. During the guardian's interview with Isabella, my daughter was clearly terrified and reluctant to speak openly about what was happening in Jennifer's household. The guardian interpreted Isabella's fear and reluctance as evidence that she was being coached by me to make false accusations. Rather than recognizing it as a natural response from a child who was afraid of retaliation from the adults who were abusing her, the court ordered a series of supervised visits and family counseling sessions that were supposed to help determine what custody arrangement would be in Isabella's best interests. But these sessions were conducted by professionals who seemed more interested in reunifying the family than in addressing the serious safety concerns that had been documented by the private investigator. During these supervised visits, Jennifer and Derek were on their best behavior, presenting themselves as a loving couple who were committed to providing Isabella with a stable home environment. The supervising social workers saw none of the chaos, substance abuse, or emotional abuse that characterized Isabella's actual living situation when the court wasn't watching. Isabella herself was unable to speak freely during these supervised sessions because Derek and Jennifer were present, and she was afraid of the consequences she would face later if she revealed the truth about her home situation. The professionals conducting these evaluations completely failed to recognize the fear and intimidation that were preventing Isabella from protecting herself. Just when I thought the legal system had completely failed my daughter, I discovered evidence that changed everything and forced the court to finally take Isabella's situation seriously. During one of my routine conversations with Isabella, she mentioned that Derek had been having friends over who gave him money for small packages, transactions that she had witnessed from her bedroom window. This casual comment from Isabella made me realize that Derek might be dealing drugs from Jennifer's house, potentially exposing Isabella to criminal activity that would finally get the court's attention in a way that neglect and emotional abuse had not. I immediately contacted my private investigator and asked him to focus specifically on documenting any illegal drug activity occurring at the residence. The investigator's findings exceeded my worst fears. Derek was indeed selling prescription medications and illegal drugs from Jennifer's home, using the house as his base of operations for a relatively substantial drug-dealing business. Jennifer was not only aware of this activity, but was actively participating in it, helping Derek package and distribute controlled substances to customers who came to the house at all hours of the day and night. Most horrifying of all, Derek and Jennifer had been using Isabella's presence in the house to make their operation appear more legitimate and family-oriented to potential customers and anyone who might be suspicious of their activities. Isabella had been unknowingly serving as camouflage for serious criminal activity, making her not just a victim of neglect, but also an unwilling participant in federal drug crimes. The investigator documented numerous instances of strangers coming to the house to purchase drugs while Isabella was present, putting her at risk of being caught in police raids, witnessing violent confrontations between dealers and customers, and being exposed to dangerous individuals with criminal backgrounds who posed serious threats to her physical safety. Financial records showed that Jennifer was using the money from drug sales to support her lifestyle, while continuing to spend the child support I was paying on alcohol and entertainment rather than on Isabella's basic needs. She had essentially turned our daughter's home into a criminal enterprise while neglecting her most fundamental parental responsibilities. Armed with this evidence of serious criminal activity, I was finally able to get the court's immediate attention. Drug dealing was something the legal system took seriously in a way that child neglect apparently was not. In the presence of criminal activity in Isabella's home, environment could not be dismissed or explained away by promises of counseling and behavior modification. The evidence was so overwhelming, and the criminal implications were so serious, that the court finally ordered Isabella's immediate removal from Jennifer's custody, pending a full investigation by both family services and law enforcement agencies, with concrete evidence of criminal activity finally forcing the court to take action. I faced a terrible dilemma about how far I was willing to go to protect Isabella from further harm. The legal system was moving slowly, despite the obvious danger. I was terrified that delays in bureaucratic procedures would leave Isabella in a dangerous situation for weeks or even months while the courts deliberated. Jennifer's response to the drug-dealing allegations was to deny everything and claim that I had fabricated evidence to frame her and Derek. She accused me of being so desperate to win custody that I was willing to make false criminal accusations against her, and she threatened to sue me for defamation and harassment if I continued to pursue my claims against her. Even more disturbing, Jennifer began coaching Isabella to recant her previous statements about the abuse and neglect she had experienced. During their supervised visits, Jennifer would tell Isabella that Daddy was trying to take her away forever, that Isabella needed to tell the social workers that she was happy living with Mommy and Derek. Isabella came back from one of these supervised visits in a state of complete emotional breakdown. Torn between her love for her mother and her terror of returning to the dangerous environment Jennifer had created, she begged me not to make her go back to her mother's house, but also expressed guilt and fear about betraying her mother by telling the truth about what was happening there. I realized that the legal system, despite finally taking the situation seriously, was still going to move too slowly to protect Isabella from immediate harm. The criminal investigation would take months to complete. The custody modification process was mired in bureaucratic delays, and Isabella was being further traumatized by the ongoing uncertainty and pressure from Jennifer to remain silent about the abuse. I made the difficult decision to take Isabella and leave the state temporarily, staying with my sister in Colorado while I worked with attorneys to expedite the custody modification process. I knew this decision would be controversial and potentially illegal, but I believed that Isabella's immediate safety was more important than following legal procedures that were failing to protect her. This decision put me at risk of being charged with kidnapping or parental abduction, but I felt that I had no choice but to remove Isabella from immediate danger. While the legal system slowly worked through its processes, I documented everything carefully, maintained communication with my attorneys, and made it clear that I was willing to return to Arizona immediately once Isabella's safety could be guaranteed. The week we spent in Colorado was the first time in months that Isabella seemed relaxed and happy. She slept through the night without nightmares, ate regular meals without anxiety, began to show signs of her natural personality, returning after months of fear and trauma. My decision to temporarily leave Arizona with Isabella ultimately forced the legal system to expedite Isabella's case in ways that months of official procedures had failed to accomplish. When Jennifer reported Isabella as kidnapped, law enforcement agencies in both Arizona and Colorado became involved, which actually helped rather than hurt our situation because it brought additional scrutiny to the evidence of criminal activity and child endangerment. The multi-state nature of the situation meant that federal agencies became involved in investigating the drug dealing operation, and their involvement provided resources and urgency that the local family court system had been lacking. Within days of our departure, Derek was arrested on federal drug distribution charges. Jennifer was arrested as an accomplice in his criminal enterprise. The criminal charges against Jennifer finally provided the concrete evidence that the family court needed to terminate her custody rights immediately. With Jennifer facing potential federal prison time and having been arrested for crimes committed in Isabella's home, there was no longer any question about whether she posed a danger to our daughter's safety and well-being. My decision to leave the state temporarily was ultimately viewed by the court as justified given the circumstances and the failure of the legal system to protect Isabella despite overwhelming evidence of danger. Rather than being charged with kidnapping, I was praised by the judge for taking decisive action to protect my daughter when the official systems had failed to do so adequately. Isabella's recovery from the trauma she experienced has been gradual but steady. With the help of skilled therapists who specialize in childhood trauma, she has been able to process her experiences and begin to rebuild her sense of safety and security. Her academic performance has improved dramatically. Her nightmares have become less frequent, and she is beginning to show signs of the confident, creative child she was before the divorce. The legal aftermath has been complex but ultimately favorable. Jennifer was convicted on drug-related charges and sentenced to federal prison, which automatically terminated her parental rights. Derek received a longer sentence for his role as the primary organizer of the drug operation, and both he and Jennifer are prohibited from having any contact with Isabella. Isabella has expressed relief that she no longer has to worry about returning to her mother's house. But she also struggles with complex feelings of guilt and loss about the end of her relationship with Jennifer. We continue to work with therapists to help her understand that none of what happened was her fault, and that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse or putting yourself in danger. Looking back on this experience, I sometimes wonder if I should have acted sooner or more decisively when I first noticed signs that something was wrong. The months of trying to work within a legal system that seemed designed to protect Jennifer's rights rather than Isabella's safety were incredibly frustrating and potentially dangerous for my daughter. But I also recognize that the evidence-gathering process was necessary to build a case strong enough to permanently remove Isabella from danger. Without the extensive documentation provided by the private investigator, and without the concrete evidence of criminal activity, the court might never have taken the situation seriously enough to protect Isabella adequately. The experience has taught me that sometimes protecting the people we love requires us to take controversial actions that others might not understand or approve of, and that trusting our instincts about danger is more important than following social expectations or legal procedures that are failing to address serious threats. So here's my question for all of you, and I genuinely want your honest opinion. Was I the asshole for taking Isabella away from her mother, even temporarily, when the legal system was failing to protect her? Should I have continued to follow official procedures even though they were clearly inadequate to address the immediate danger Isabella was facing? Or do you think I did the right thing by prioritizing my daughter's safety over legal protocols and social expectations about mothers' rights? I really want to know what you think, because even though everything worked out in the end, I sometimes wonder if there was a better way to handle this situation that would have been less traumatic for Isabella and less legally risky for me. Please let me know in the comments what you would have done in my position, and whether you think my actions were justified given what I discovered about Isabella's living situation. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more real stories about the challenges of protecting the people we love. And make sure to check out my next video where I'll be sharing another story that will definitely make you think about the difficult decisions we sometimes have to make when the systems designed to protect us are failing to do their job.